Welcome to Piano Fascia, the face of the piano. Hi, I'm Nathan, and today we're talking about the piano and all of its parts, how they're constructed, and how the piano produces sound, and we'll compare that to other keyboard instruments.
Sort of sounds obvious, but there's a lid on the piano. That's to stop the dust from getting on the keys and between the keys, save your fingers from getting dirty, and so that you can play fast and furious and it doesn't affect the performance. There's 88 notes on the piano made up of black and white keys, and the black keys in little groups of 2 and 3, and that helps you navigate around the notes, as does directly underneath the label for the piano where you have middle C, and the other notes around it are usually centered on middle C. We can close the lid, and this one's got a soft touch feature, which is fantastic. You'd never no idea how terrifying it is to have your fingers almost slammed by a lid coming down. We're going to take off this music stand before we do anything else, and to do that, you must have the lid closed so that you don't damage the top of it. So this is the piano lid, and it has a stick that keeps it in 3 different positions. There's full stick, or half stick, as you can see doing now, which you might do if you want less volume coming out of the piano, and quarter stick, which is if you're accompanying somebody else, like a violin or another single line instrument, and you don't want as much sound coming out. It certainly does affect the brightness of the sound as well. Back on full stick so that I can show you inside. Inside the piano, you'll notice that we've got the strings. There's machine heads on the end which tighten the strings so that you can tune it, and then you will see we've got dampers which come down and stop the strings from ringing, and this bridge which all the strings go over. There's the metal frame here which holds the tension of the strings, and there's a wooden soundboard made from spruce usually so that it vibrates and amplifies naturally the sound of the strings, which are cross-strung to give a greater chorus effect on each of them. You'll notice here that you've got 3 strings per note, or further down the piano, 2 strings per note, and at the very bottom, 1 string per note, and that is to give a more vibrant and chorus sound to the higher strings. When I play a note, you'll see a hammer comes up and strikes the string, and then immediately backs off that string, and the damper comes up to release it so that it can play the sound. The damper comes back down on the string to stop the string from resonating. As long as I hold my finger on that key, those strings will resonate and those dampers will stay up. And when I release the key, the dampers come back down on the string. They're positioned in chromatic notes, so you'll have a half note in between each of them. The pedals. There's 3 pedals on most pianos, the rightmost one being the sustain pedal, the leftmost one being the soft pedal, and the middle one being the sostenuto pedal on the grand piano, or if you've got an upright piano, it'll be a practice pedal. The sustain pedal on the right releases the dampers of all the strings and not just one string, as you're seeing here. If I press the pedal down, it releases all the strings, and all the strings will ring until I release the pedal. So if I'm playing 1 note at a time, it's only releasing the damper for 1 note, but if I keep the pedal down, it'll allow those strings to ring while I've got the pedal down. And that's why it's called the sustain or damper pedal. The next pedal I'll talk about is the soft pedal. On a grand piano, that actually shifts the whole keyboard. You see that moving there? And shifts the hammers against the strings so that it only plays 2 of the strings instead of 3. Or 1 of the strings instead of 2, and that makes it softer. The third pedal is the sostenuto pedal. And this one keeps the dampers up for all the strings, but only the strings that you have when you've pressed the pedal down. So you can play some strings that are sustained, and other ones you can play only when you have your fingers on the string. So you get all sorts of effects in the bass, and you can have other notes in the treble. So, we're going to start talking about the predecessors of the piano from the clavichord, which came into fore around the 1400s. And this diagram here has showing the mechanism of the clavichord, which sort of dictates what you can perform in it and how. What sort of sounds you can make. I'll show you what I mean. This is the string, and we've got here the key, and here is the pivot, so that when you press down on the key, the back of the key goes up, which forces this thing called the tangent up into the string. And it strikes the string at a particular point. Where it strikes it determines the note. So everything from this side is going to be played. So if you've got the tangent striking the string here, for instance, then you only have this much string being vibrated. And so you got a higher pitch because of the length of the string being shortened. It also means that this tangent stays in contact with the string while the note's being played. So you got the advantage here of being able to continue to move the key up and down, and while it's still touching the string, which gives you the advantage of giving some vibrato or to vary the volume of the note as you're going very slightly. It also means that you can have several tangents on the string, so you can have several notes being able to be played on the one string and make your instrument shorter and lighter. The next thing to talk about is the harpsichord, and this came into fore around about the 1500s. And you got the same idea. We got the string and the key, and it works on a pivot. And when you push this down, it pushes the back of the key up, which then means that this plectrum here strikes the string. But it doesn't stay in contact with the string. It just goes ding, strikes the string, which means you've actually got to have as many strings on the keyboard as you want to have notes. But it does mean it's significantly louder, but you've got no control after the string has been plucked by the plectrum. This meant it was much more versatile instrument. You could play it in orchestras with other in larger rooms. And then you come onto the piano, which started being developed in around the 1700s, but really the mechanism itself is actually really quite complicated and took a couple of hundred years, and I'll explain why. You've got the key here, which you press down, and the pivot, and you've then got the back of the key, which is pushed up when you hit the key. But this thing here called the hammer has a felt substance here, which means that if you strike the string harder, you can make the note louder. And if you strike the string softer, you can make the note softer. Hence the name piano forte, as it was known, piano being the Italian word for soft and forte being the Italian word for loud. It could be loud or soft. The problem is, of course, that once the hammer strikes the string, then it will dampen the string because it stays on there because it's made of felt. So they need to develop a mechanism, I haven't shown it here, of making it come back off the string so that the string could continue to vibrate. And like the harpsichord, you've got as many strings on the piano as you would want to have notes. As we saw on the piano before, you might have multiple strings as well. So you might have the felt of the hammer strike multiple strings, and that gives you the ability to make it louder and softer as well. If the hammer then goes up, strikes a string, and comes back off so that it can resonate, it needs a way to stop it resonating. And so you have here this thing called the damper, which we saw before, that when you release the key, this damper goes back on the note to stop the string from vibrating. So it's actually a really complicated mechanism that occurs. And it wasn't even until the early 1900s that an upright version of this was developed, which I haven't shown you today. An upright piano just means it doesn't take as much room as a harpsichord or a piano. And of course, where we've gone since the piano is another version of it, which is the electronic keyboard. And they started being developed, would you believe, in the around 1874, the electric instrument. The ability, the desire was to send musical notes over a telegraph wire. And then in the 1970s, you had Rhodes develop their Tyne keyboard, which made sounds by vibrating a metal bar and then putting an electronic sensor on the metal bar. So that worked a lot like the piano does in terms of its mechanism. And then around 1983 was a popular Yamaha DX7 and electronic synthesizers that occurred since then, as well as analog ones before that. And like the piano, it has a key which is depressed, it has a pivot, and it goes up. And the sensor will determine what note it is, the velocity that you have played it, and when you've released it. And those things together will help the computer then determine what sound to play. And there's two types of generating a sound for an electronic keyboard or a synthesizer. And the first one is by a waveform. So you can produce a waveform, which would be a sine wave or a triangle wave or a square wave. Or you can sample sounds and then reproduce them and reproduce various parts of the waveform. So here you've got a part of the waveform called the attack. So that is how fast it goes up in volume. You've got the decay, how fast it decreases in volume. The sustain, which is how long you have the note on for, which is obviously ended by the release component. So you've actually got at least four things that you need to sample or take an electronic recording of in order to produce a sound which is triggered by the key press.
Another great thing about some of the modern keyboard instruments is that they've got a feature called aftertouch, and that allows you to modify the sound after you've sounded the note while you've still got control of it with the key depressed. You can use this to increase the volume, apply vibrato, add other sorts of effects, much like the clavichord did back in its day. So keyboards continue to evolve. Speaking of evolving, here's a piece I'm about to play for you by Bach. He had a harpsichord to play with, or a clavichord to play with, or an organ. And some of the features of the piano I think he would have been envious of, like the ability to control the volume of individual notes. Before I do, coming up in coming episodes, we've got how to tune the piano and mean tempering and well tempering and what that means. Thanks for watching.